42 years and counting, our classmate, Senator Edward M. Kennedy.
Thank you very much to George. Thank you. George Abrams. I don't think we could have had a class of 1954 if we didn't have George Abrams. I will tell you, he has been so devoted to this class over so many years, and I think those that have been closely associated with it know it. And he's been a dear and valued friend. He's been such a dear and valued friend that he's put me on the last. I'm the last speaker that you have. And I'm the last speaker before happy hour. And I don't know what it was and put me on at 5 minutes of 5 here, but in any event, I thank you, George. I know I did something to you back there in those times years ago, but he's been a dear and valued friend. He and Maida have been such dear friends to me, and I thank him for all he has done for when he came to the United States Senate. He was chairman of our Refugee Committee and did so impressive work down there, and has been so devoted to this great celebration. It's really a pleasure to be with George. Let me say a word about my colleagues. I've added up, it's been a pleasure to have served and continue to serve with all of them. I did my math, and among us we've clocked a total of 108 years in the Senate and House of Representatives. And Connecticut good neighbor Nancy Johnson is a Republican power in the House these days. It's always a pleasure to be with her. And Tony Bielenson and I were both elected at the age of 30. He was the pioneer in environmental issues, on family planning, National Health Service. His son is a leader on these issues and leading in a great city, has been selected as the outstanding public servant. So he has not only had a great career himself, but he's inspired another generation. So it's a pleasure to be with Tony. David Bowen was a voice of reason on civil rights when it wasn't easy. A pleasure to be with him. But it is a special pleasure to be with an old friend, a very dear friend, and John Culver. I have been vast friends for some 50 years. He helped me get started in the United States Senate. After that, went back to Iowa, elected to the Congress of the United States, then to the United States Senate. And in many ways, the most enjoyable years I spent in Congress were the 16 great years that we served together, and I wish he was still there. John, as George mentioned, wrote a brilliant book on Henry Wallace. I thought it deserved a Pulitzer Prize. It is just a very, very special historical document that is a great addition and help in understanding an extraordinary period of time in American history. John and I, as you remember, particularly with regard to John, had been good football friends on campus, and we made a good team in the Senate. John was the fullback carrying the ball, grinding out the yardage on the field, later on the issues, shaking off Republican tacklers. I was the left end, which everyone thought was where I learned my political philosophy. So, thank you, John. It's good to be here with the class of '54. An article in yesterday's Boston Globe mentioned that a pretty good case could be made for the class as the Harvard's greatest class. Sounds good to me. The Globe article also referred to a certain class poll that asked extraordinary personal and interesting questions about the reading habits and, shall we say, lifestyle of the members of the class. I was interested to know that we read an average of 17 books a year, and that 4% of the class has a more interesting personal life than ever before. Well done, class. Well done. "50 years, so much has changed in government and politics, but so much has stayed the same, especially the power of the nation's ideals to attract talented men and women to public life. I find the Senate is every bit as inspiring to me today as it was in 1962. The key to enacting Progressive legislation is very simple. 90% of it is hard work, and the other 50% is Irish luck. I learned early from my brothers and from my grandfather, the Boston mayor, that the best way to meet a challenge is to see an opportunity. And the miracle in Philadelphia in 1787 makes it possible to treat every challenge that way. We may not always live up to those ideals, but it's endlessly gratifying that so many in each new generation are so eager to try. And it's also gratifying that Harvard and the School of Government, named for my brother, and its Institute of Politics are at the heart of that effort. You learn very quickly that young men and women are ready to sign on for community and public service if only somebody asks them. Harvard asks, and the response has been truly extraordinary. I've been in the United States Senate for nearly 42 years. That is not quite the 50-year milestone that we celebrate today for the class of '54, but it's a lot longer than I ever would have contemplated when I first entered public life. And during those 42 years, I've served under 9 presidents, 4 Democrat, 5 Republican. One of those presidents, my brother Jack, was also a Harvard man, and his administration was filled with Harvard men and women, including my brother Bob as an attorney general. And from where I sit, those were extraordinary days in our nation's history, and I'm so proud and honored to have been a part of them. Throughout its history, the Senate has, and by and large, been an extraordinary collegial place. And with fierce opponents debating an issue on the Senate floor and then working together to pass the legislation the next day. Even in the fiercely partisan time during the Clinton administration, you could still find that kind of collegiality. I remember one time when I was going to offer the minimum wage legislation, increase in the minimum wage, to legislation that was sponsored by Senator Murkowski that was going to increase the national parks in communities around the country. And I went up to our leader, Senator Daschle, and I said, Senator Murkowski said that if I didn't offer the amendment on the increase in the minimum wage, he would put my new national park, which was New Bedford, which is the home of Melville and the great whaling tradition, deserved on its merits to be included in it. But if I offered the minimum wage, he would not include it. And I said, I'm still going to offer the minimum wage. So I offered it, we were defeated, and they called the roll, and the bill carried, and Senator Murkowski came up to me and said, well, Senator Kennedy, don't feel too bad about that, because I left out yours, but I left out one of Bob Dole's, who's the majority leader. So it really wasn't partisan, because I left out his and I left out yours. So I said, well, that helps out a lot, and I thank you very much. So they finished with the roll call, and the Senate wound up, and I was cleaning up my desk, and I saw Bob Dole sitting over there. And I said to Bob Dole, I said, what about another parks bill, national parks bill? He said, what have you got in mind? I said, yours and mine. He was the majority leader at that time. He said, will Daschle clear that? Absolutely, because Daschle knew that I could have gotten mine in, but as a matter of principle, that I hadn't offered that thing. He said, draft it up. It passed in the next 15 minutes. His bill, his park, and mine. The most interesting, it went to the conference. And when it got to the conference, there were those, with all deference to my colleague here, Republicans, that said, okay, we'll take Dole's, but we won't take yours. And Dole said, no, we went in together, and we're coming back together. Now that was collegiality. Even though we differed with Bob Dole on 90%, that would no more happen today. That kind of working together, that kind of understanding, that kind of opportunity just doesn't exist. It's become a cliche to suggest that collegiality is gone and partisanship rules the day. But I don't think that tells the entire story. There are still times when it's possible to reach across the aisle and accomplish something good for the American people. I had great hopes for the No Child Left Behind legislation, but those opportunities are harder to find in any election season. There is also a more personal tone in disagreements these days. Till a few years ago, no senator would ever dream of going to the floor to mention another senator by name without first notifying that senator in advance. Thus, the notified senator had the opportunity to sit on the floor to hear the other senator take him to task, and usually in the quite polite terms, the gentleman from Massachusetts and the like. Without question, the tone of the speeches was much milder when you had to look the opposing senator in the eye. I recall that just a few years ago, a Republican senator went to the floor to challenge and contradict one of Senator Bob Byrd's statements, and he mentioned Senator Byrd by name without first notifying. And as the informal historian and keeper of the Senate tradition, Bob Byrd was livid at the breach of Senate procedure. He ran to the floor to excoriate the offending senator for failing to notify him in advance, and by the end of the episode, the Republican senator was publicly apologizing to Senator Byrd, and the substantive issue of disagreement faded into the background, while the issue of protocol breach took the center stage. Unfortunately for the Senate, however, that sense of protocol is today honored more often in the breach. Perhaps not as it relates to Senator Byrd, but certainly as it relates to the 99 other members of the Senate. This aggressive and personal partisanship was not as evident even 10 years ago. For example, when Mitt Romney challenged me in 1994, he asked Orrin Hatch, certainly a fierce Republican partisan, to come to Massachusetts to campaign for him. But Orrin was on the ranking member of the Health Committee, and I was the chairman, and Orrin refused to come in to Massachusetts to campaign against me. Collegiality, particularly on our committee, trumped partisanship. Contrast that with what we see today. In just this last month, the Senate Majority Leader, Bill Frist, went to South Dakota to actively campaign against the Minority Leader, Tom Daschle. That is a dramatic and unprecedented move that certainly does nothing to advance the collegiality. For nearly the entire history of the Senate, collegiality didn't stop at the party line, but absent some sea change, it's beginning to seem that collegiality is going to join the ranks of handwritten letters, soon to be considered a quaint, old-fashioned custom. This decreasing collegiality is not, in my judgment, the result of having any particular party in control. I think it is partly the result of 24-hour news cycles in which talk radio and TV personalities keep ratings up by engaging in strident and aggressively personal attacks on politicians, and that tone then spreads to discourse on Capitol Hill. I certainly know something about throwing a little partisan red meat, but I'm talking about something different from that. It's more of a take-no-prisoners approach to government that I do not believe is in the best interest of the American people. Another reason for the changed tone of the Senate, I believe, is that today many more members come to the Senate from the House of Representatives, and the House has a very different set of rules and atmosphere than you have historically found in the Senate. My colleagues from the House can speak more directly to this, but the party line voting and the all-or-nothing philosophy that permeates the House of Representatives has not been a part of the Senate dynamic until very recently. Believe it or not, this is also the first time in the entire 50 years since the graduation of the class of '54 that the Republican Party has been in control of both the White House and the Senate and the House of Representatives, and an overwhelming majority of the federal judiciary has been appointed by the Republican administration. Often in those 50 years, Democrats had control, but on those occasions, it was never a significant strain on the system of checks and balances because Democratic unity is such an unusual phenomenon. As the saying goes, we tend to line up in a circle when we try to form a firing squad. The checks and balances are less effective when the party in control is more monolithic. The only real check on a bad idea today is a filibuster in the Senate. The challenge is especially serious when the pressure from the right is so determined to extend its control to the judicial branch of the government as well. Fortunately, we have an election every 2 years that can restore the balance when the strain is too severe. I think of Winston Churchill often these days. Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others that have been tried from time to time. If it could transform 13 tiny quarreling colonies into a free nation 200 years ago, if it could transform Europe and Japan after World War II and bring down the Berlin Wall as well, it can also produce good answers to the many challenges that we face today at home and around the world. I'm an optimist, though. I like to think that the times are auspicious, that we can tap into the wave of new hope and commitment stirring in the country now, after the very moving dedication of the World War II Memorial a week ago, the 60th anniversary of D-Day. We are all in this together. The greed, the special interests, the petty partisan passions that poison politics can't endlessly stop an idea whose time has come. Again, Churchill said it best, America will do the right thing after it's tried everything else. Legislating is not exactly instant gratification. In the 60s, as a young senator, I was drawn to the issue of civil rights, education, and health care, and I still am. And Harvard's been an indispensable resource. You can assemble the best minds on any issue and then try to form a coalition of the willing to fight for it. Usually you have to sustain some losses and then regroup, but you can come back to fight again. Most of the real gains in policies happen that way, incrementally. Nothing happens if you let the best become the enemy of the good. We've been struggling for 200 years to fulfill the promise of equal opportunity for all. The year the class of '54 graduated was the year of the modern revolution in civil rights began with the landmark school desegregation decision by the Supreme Court. We've made progress since then, but we know that civil rights is still the unfinished business of America. In education, we began to argue in Congress in the 60s about aid to low-income students and high-poverty districts, and we still are. And today we continue those battles. In higher education, we still have glaring inequalities, and qualified low-income students are only a quarter as likely to attend college as they're more qualified but wealthy, as equally qualified, no more qualified than but wealthier fellow students. The GI Bill for World War II generation was an early giant step, but we still have miles to go to close the gap. President Summers has announced an enormously interesting, innovative program that any child that is basically in the bottom third of the economic income, but is able to meet the criteria and the standards here at Harvard, for income for $40,000 and less, will not have to pay the tuition. Leading advance in terms of colleges that challenge other colleges across this country. Healthcare policy is never easy either. In 1954, we were just a few years away from Harry Truman's unsuccessful effort to enact universal health care. Still hasn't happened, even though every other industrial nation in the world did it years ago, made health care a fundamental right for all. We shouldn't be going it alone on foreign policy, and we shouldn't be pretending on health care that everyone is out of step but Uncle Sam. Let me When my brother Jack was in Congress and Senate in the 1940s and 50s, the Senate would recess in June for the rest of the year. Some members spent more time on the links of the Burning Tree Country Club than on the floor of the United States Senate. But with the seriousness of the issues on civil rights and the war in Vietnam, the Senate changed to a 5-day-a-week, 12-month calendar with some votes being held between Christmas and New Year's Day. The challenges facing the country were too important to ignore. The time in actual session is shorter now. We don't get out in June, but votes usually only take place between Tuesdays and Thursdays. There are many more recesses than there used to be, and they are longer. But the problems that we are facing in our country are as great as or greater than at any time in our nation's history. And I believe that we will rise to meet them. It took Lyndon Johnson's landslide in 1964 to make Medicare happen in 1965, and a John Kerry landslide in 2004 might just be what the doctor ordered for 2005. Thank you very much.